British political commentator Sami Hamdi returned to the UK last week after spending 2 weeks in ICE detention. Hamdi was arrested on the 26th of October at San Francisco Airport while midway through a US speaking tour where he was speaking against Israel's genocide of the people of Gaza. The arrest followed a campaign against Hamdi by far-right activist and Donald Trump ally Laura Loomer. And this is how the State Department publicly justified his detention. So they said this: "We've said it before, we'll say it again. The United States has no obligation to host foreigners who support terrorism and actively undermine the safety of Americans. We continue to revoke the visas of persons engaged in such activity." That was their public explanation. However, Hamdi's charging document did not identify any criminal conduct or security grounds as the reason for his detention. Instead, he was accused of overstaying his visa, which had been revoked the day before without him being notified. I spoke to Sami Hamdi earlier today and asked him to describe his experience in ICE detention.
So on the Monday before I was arrested on the Sunday. On the Monday before, Laura Loomer, a far-right activist, if you want to call her that, tweeted and said that there is an individual from the UK who's going around the United States lecturing, we need to revoke his visa. I had been lecturing in the US on a number of occasions in Stanford, Berkeley, CUNY, and these other prestigious institutions. And I was there on an invitation on this occasion by the Council of American Islamic Relations, talking about a situation in Gaza, in Syria, and in the Middle East more broadly. On the Monday, she posted a video of me where I was talking about the impact of social media on changing public opinion. She said we need to get his visa revoked. This was a week after Ted Cruz and Dinesh D'Souza had suggested something similar. On the Wednesday, she tweeted and said that, guys, I'm in Congress. And she made a few Islamophobic comments, but then said, I have very good news coming to you in 2 days. And I knew that she was talking about me. She said, the news in 2 days about a certain individual touring the United States. On the Friday, I gave my lecture in the Bay Area, Saturday in Sacramento. Sunday morning, at about 7 o'clock, I arrive at San Francisco Airport to fly to Florida. I check in my bag. I go through security. I look up to see where gate D38 is to fly to Tampa. And the man approaches me and says, "Excuse me, are you Sami Hamdi?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Your visa was revoked, has been revoked, and now you're here illegally." I said, "Nobody told me that my visa was even under review. What do you mean it's been revoked?" He said, "Here is the memo from the State Department." So I opened it. I had a look at it. It didn't state any reason whatsoever for the revocation of the visa. Nothing about anything I'd said or done or any crime or any. It just said the State Department has the right to revoke whenever it wants, and it's decided to revoke it. So I said to him that, what's the reason for it? He said, we haven't been told. We were just told to pick you up. I said, well, look, I'm a British citizen. I'm supposed to go home in 4 days anyway. I'll just book my ticket now from San Francisco. There's 6 flights a day and fly home now. He told me that's not how this works. And then 5 other agents appeared from behind me and surrounded me. When I walked with them outside the airport, there was a black car with tinted windows. So I didn't enter the car. They told me enter the car. I said, I'm not entering. They said, we told you to enter the car. I said, listen, I'm a British citizen. I don't need to believe you are who you say you are. This feels too much like the movies. If I'm going to enter the car, you should at least let me call a civil liberties organization so I can understand my rights and what I can and cannot do. So I need to call somebody on my phone. They said, no, you can't call anybody. Then when I insisted, I said, there's no way I'm entering the car. We can just stand here all day. One of them said, you got 1 minute, in a very gruff and aggressive way. So I called a lawyer from the Council of American Islamic Relations who told me comply, but just find your alien number and let us know where you are. When I told them now, let me call my family just to let them know I'm okay, a agent from behind me grabs me, pushes me against the door, handcuffs my hands at the back really tightly, and they throw me in the car. And I go on a 6-hour journey in which I was then loaded into 2 different, a van and a car, so a car to the processing center. They tried to make me sign to say I am guilty and I'm being deported. I said, for what crime? And I looked at the charge sheet, and the charge sheet said, you're guilty of overstaying. I said, well, I'm not guilty of overstaying. My visa's till 2028. It's a 10-year visa. I'm not guilty of anything. I'm not signing. They said, if you want to go home, we'll make it easy, just sign. I said, I'm not signing. Then they bundled me into a van in which the space in the back was maybe 80 centimeters by 4 meters. Very cramped, claustrophobic space. They drove us for 2 hours and a half. We stopped in a car park. This is all while I'm in cuffs, hands, feet, and chain around my body, in shackles, basically. We arrive in a car park 2.5 hours later. Then they bundle me into another black car, which is an even tighter space than the van. And then we drive another 2 hours and a half until we get to a facility called McFarland. When we entered the facility, at this point, they still haven't let me call my lawyer. They haven't let me, know my rights. They haven't said anything to me except that in the facility, they'll explain to you what can be done. We entered the facility, and in front of me were two Indians and a Latino guy. And I want to emphasize this particular story because it gives you an insight into the kind of the mentality of the guards that were watching over us. So the Latino guy walks in and the lady says, "Where are you from?" And as a joke, he says, "Afghanistan." And she says, "Oh, Afghanistan, your people want to kill my people." And he looks baffled and bewildered. He said, "What do you mean? No, we don't want to kill anyone." And I'm looking baffled at her. And she says, "Yes, your people want to kill Americans." I said, "Excuse me, that's categorically not true." And then the Latino guy says, "No, I'm not Afghan. I'm not Afghan. I'm just Mexican." Then they make you give over your stuff, change your clothes, you put in your blue clothes. They take you in a hall where there are more than 100 people in this hall. It's all with bunk beds. And you can tell that it's overcrowded. There's not enough pillows, not enough blankets and the like and whatnot. And at this point, still, I haven't been offered my phone call with the lawyer. They said there's this card, you have 5 minutes free, you can use a payphone. And I was able to call the lawyer just to let them know at least that I was in McFarlane. On the second day, I fell very ill. On my left side, it was something that I ate. The food there has like sweet corn with black spots on it, beans that look like they were pulled out 2 days after their expiry date, meat that smells funny. And the inmates tell me that it used to taste worse, but it used to be worse before. So while I'm there, I fell ill on the following day on my left side in agony. I was convinced I had blown a kidney or a spleen or something. When I went to the guard to say, "Listen, I'm in agony here. I'm struggling to breathe. I have a problem all on my left side." And she said to me, "Okay, I'll let the medical team know." 1 hour passes, 2 hour passes, 3 hour passes. And the other inmates are saying, "Listen, we think we know what's wrong with you. You're not going to see a doctor. They don't come to see us. Take an ibuprofen to make you survive the pain. And the doctor will come when they come." I went to the guard. "I need to see a doctor." Doctor comes when they come. And then when the guard really felt sympathy for me after 3 hours and she could see I'm struggling, she said to me, she whispered in my ear and she said to me, "Listen, the doctor's already here and already has been here, but they won't come unless you drop on the floor right now." So instead of dropping on the floor, I called my wife and I said, "Please tell the media this is what's happening." And when the media pressure came, the doctors ended up coming, quite upset, but they treated me a bit better afterwards, although I was sick for the 7-8 days, continuously vomiting. On the third day, I won't go day by day. Just in case anybody's worried, I'm going to go through all 18 days. On the third day, I was told that I was going to Fresno. And this was told to me about 8:30 p.m. And the inmates all said, "Listen, they might be transferring you." So what ICE do, ICE are aware that the overwhelming number of cases in these facilities, if they're brought before a court, then it is most likely that the inmate is going to win. So ICE try to frustrate you from seeing a judge as much as possible. And one of the tactics is, if let's say you're supposed to see the judge tomorrow and your case is strong, ICE will randomly transfer you to a different state and a different facility to prevent you from appearing before the judge and forcing a delay in the court. For example, we had a guy who was 2 days before his final hearing. It's a master hearing, evidence hearing, then final hearing. And the poor guy had been there 9 months. 2 days before his final hearing, when ICE thought that he would be released and the judge would announce his release, they transferred him in the middle of the night from Texas all the way to California. Meaning he had to start his hearings all over again from the master hearing. When I called my lawyers and told them they're taking me to Fresno, they were worried I'd be transferred. So they went to the judge and they said to the judge, "We're worried he's going to be transferred." The judge responded and said, "Due to concerns over freedom of speech," excuse me, "due to concerns over freedom of speech, we're issuing a restraining order. He may not be transferred anywhere." 10 days later, so in the Fresno cell, actually, just a point about the Fresno cell before I finish up with the federal court. In the Fresno cell, they throw you in a 5x4 cell and put 15 inmates there. They make you sleep on the floor with cuffs on your feet. And they kept us there for 24 hours just to try to make us sign a deportation order, which was illegal. What ICE try to do is they try to mentally break you until you sign it and somehow confess to some crime. 10 days later, I received a call from my lawyers. They told me I missed a roller coaster the day before. I said, "What happened?" They said that the federal judge agreed to expedite my case because of serious concerns over transgressions of freedom of speech. So the lawyer of the DHS had responded and said, quote, "A foreign alien does not have the right to freedom of speech and so the court has no jurisdiction to assess it. The judge responded within the hour and said he does have the right to freedom of speech, and we believe that there is a credible evidence that it might have been transgressed here. The following day, despite what the DHS was saying publicly, all these heinous accusations being made, privately, the lawyer of the DHS, a specific lawyer assigned to my case specifically, approached my lawyers by text, email, and phone call and said, listen, we've read an article in USA Today by his wife that he wants to go home. We're willing to let him go home. We just want to clear all this up. We just want to make it go away. We've already spoken to all the relevant authorities. We pulled the strings. If he wants to go home, we'll cancel the deportation order. We'll cancel the removal order. We'll cancel the charges and he can go home scot-free, no problem whatsoever. So I responded, I said, I've been told that whenever an inmate signs voluntary departure, you keep him here for 3 months. They said, we promise you'll be home within 3 days. On the Monday, I saw the judge, 48 hours, I was home. But this story was not about me. I was not the one being targeted. It's important to put this into a wider context in which, first, the Israeli lobby came for the citizens, threatening Mehdi Hassan, a naturalized citizen, that they might remove his citizenship. And they also went after US citizens of the American Muslims for Palestine by trying to drag them through the courts in Michigan and Nevada. And the Israeli lobby lost in those courts. The cases against American Muslims for Palestine were thrown out. So the Israeli lobby decided to go after green cards, Mahmoud Khalil and these others. But they found that even though they transferred Mahmoud Khalil to Louisiana to try to get a preferable judgment, a judge in New Jersey ruled that it was a transgression against Mahmoud Khalil and he was released. So then the Israeli lobby went after student visas, Muhsin Mahdawi and Rumaysa Ozturk and other students. Although these two were detained, they were eventually released by federal judges who protected their right to freedom of speech. And therefore, I believe that what happened to me was a hysterical lashing out on the part of the Israeli lobby to desperately find any scalp possible so that they could strike a climate of fear or create a climate of fear to stop the Palestinian advocacy, because according to the polls, it's working and Americans are turning on the Israeli lobby. Candidates are openly saying that they're not going to take AIPAC money anymore. We've seen the Marjorie Taylor Greens turn on Israel, the Tucker Carlsons, Candace Owens and the like. This was not about targeting Sami Hamdi. It was about targeting journalism, freedom of speech and advocacy, and basically saying to the Americans that if freedom of speech allows us to speak the truth about what's happening in Palestine, and the Americans are going to accept that truth, then we would rather erode freedom of speech of the Americans in order to keep up the lie that the genocide in Palestine is justified. The final point I'll say is this. The inmates were very keen to impress upon me that the reason I was able to be released in 2 weeks is because of the media coverage from Novara Media, Guardian, Middle East Eye, Reuters, BBC, and all these others. They said I was lucky to be released in 2 weeks because I had people who remembered me and were talking about me and therefore applying pressure. Even ICE, when I was going to the airport to fly back home, I spent 2 hours telling me sob stories about how hard their life is ruining the lives of other people, almost in an attempt, and they said it at the end, please don't write too harshly about us, we're also human too. But the reason why I mention this point is that ICE, even in my case, my original court case was November 6th, and they changed it to November 10th. When I told them, why are you changing my date to November 10th? They said that on your charge sheet, it says that you landed in Santa Ana, California. I said, yes. They said, we changed this to you were pre-cleared and took off from Calgary, Canada. I said, what difference does that make? They're both true. They said, yes, because of this edit, then we have to delay your court by 4 days. They told me I was lucky it was 4 days because of the media pressure. For somebody else, like a Latino individual called Antonio, I remember Antonio, he'd been there for 10 months, married to a US citizen. His kids are US citizens. He went to a meeting, to an appointment with ICE to update his details. They grabbed him at the appointment. His final hearing was in the week that I arrived at the facility. So he's preparing, and the overwhelming sentiment is he's going to be freed. He went to the court and came back 10 minutes after. So we said to him, Antonio, what happened? He said, ICE said they didn't have enough time to review all of the evidence, and the judge said the same thing. So the judge said, let's reschedule to January 29th. So 3 months from now. And that's just deemed acceptable. The point here being is that they catch you on the loopholes, even when the judge rules you should be free. Like Liqa Kurdiya in the Texas facility, for example, or Alma Beg, who's in the California facility in Golden State Annex. The judge in Liqa's case has ruled twice that she is to be freed immediately and to be allowed to be released into the United States. And Alma Bek, the same thing. What ICE do is, before you can see the judge to insist that you be released, they still keep you detained to try to find a third country that will take you. And they try to delay your complaint to the judge to insist on an immediate order, an enforcement order, in the hope that you will get so mentally tired, you'll go home on your own and they can say to the judge, yeah, we know you said they should be released, but they decided to go home anyway. It's these darker, bureaucratic loophole tactics that ICE uses to keep those inmates in there. And my experience there was, I was lucky I was a British citizen. I was lucky the media spoke to me. But within those walls, rule of law does not seem to apply. ICE seems to act with impunity. And it's nasty the way they keep innocent people incarcerated for so long.
And do you think this has backfired in terms of, now obviously sort of what ICE are doing and what Trump is doing, he is trying to intimidate people and he's doing that very effectively. I think, as you say, sort of because you had so much media support, you were only in there for 2 weeks when you could have been in there much longer. I have to say, it sounds like a pretty unpleasant 2 weeks to have gone through. I don't want to underplay that. I suppose because America is quite polarized at the moment, there are a lot of people who don't like Trump. They don't like what ICE are doing. And I was almost surprised at some of the coverage you got in America. As someone who is stridently pro-Palestine, there was, after you were released, there was an interview with Wolf Blitzer on CNN. Now, Wolf Blitzer is someone who used to work for AIPAC. And that to me seemed like a very open-minded, quite friendly interview. Do you think that potentially sort of the Trump administration and the Israel lobbyists who are sort of trying to push the Trump administration to detain people like yourself, do you think they might have overplayed their hand and it's backfired somewhat?
The sentiment I actually got from the lawyers is that it had very little to do with the Trump administration. What I got for the sentiment from the government lawyer, from the DHS lawyer, was that when all of this blew up and all the media was doing the coverage, somebody at the State Department and at the DHS sort of walks in the office and says, what idiot listened to Laura Loomer? Who on earth brought this up? Who revoked the guy's visa? Like, who on earth put us in this mess in the first place? The sentiment I got is that the Israeli lobby still believed it had the influence it once had, while more calmer heads in the federal courts and the State Department sort of said, we don't need this headache at the moment. And it's very striking because it falls into this narrative of America first versus Israel first. Even Wolf Blitzer, who interviewed me, Wolf Blitzer was very clear to assert that, Mr. Hamdi, we believe in freedom of speech here, and we reject anybody who tries to infringe on that freedom of speech. On the plane, there were Republicans sitting with me on the plane who were a bit nervous when the guards took me onto the plane and said, why have guards brought you on the plane? Are you some sort of serial killer? So I showed them the articles. I had Wi-Fi on the plane about Reuters, British journalists detained for criticizing Israel. And they were horrified at the notion that their sacred freedom of speech is being undermined because I'm criticizing a foreign government. And Americans, contrary to what people tend to say about them sometimes, I found them to be very amenable people. People are very amenable to the truth. I went to Texas. I went to every state except New Hampshire. And you talked about what's happening in Palestine. You talked about the genocide. Even those who support the Israelis, once you sit with them and talk to them and show the images, the most common reaction was, well, I had no idea that's what they're doing. When you show them how much the US government is spending on the Israelis while Americans are going bankrupt because they're unable to pay medical bills, you can see the frustration on the face of the Americans and the way that they're turning away from what they once perceived to be this ally that they had to defend at all costs. And that's why I think that, your point is well noted. It's not just this. The reason why I think that it wasn't about me specifically. I think Americans were so offended on the attack on freedom of speech, which is why you had across the spectrum, from the Wolf Blitzers to the Medea Benjamins and these others all coming out, and Norman Finkelsteins all coming out and saying that this is dangerous and that this is an attack not on Sami Hamdi, a British journalist. This is an attack on American freedoms and we need to do something about it. And I think that's an extraordinary development. And I think when all is said and done, the reality is that the manner in which the American State Department allowed me to leave the United States, I think speaks volumes about the extent to which the Israeli lobby is losing its influence. And in the words of Donald Trump, who told I think the Financial Times, they reported it about 3-4 months ago, he told Zionist donors that, listen, I'm just warning you, my base is starting to hate you. I think the Americans are deeply starting to hate AIPAC and the Israeli lobby that is now threatening their fundamental freedoms.
You return to America while Trump is still president. I know you were sort of midway through a speaking tour. Will you finish that speaking tour?
The sentiment I got from the lawyer was that just go back, wait for it to die down, apply for a visa and come back. Like, we won't make it difficult for you. And also, I think that if the aim of Laura Loomer and the Israeli lobby is to prevent us from speaking to the American people because there is a fear that the Americans are actually listening, it would mean that she won if I stay away from the States. And I think that the hospitality and the kindness and the generosity I saw from the Americans, I think that the idea that Laura Loomer is the arbiter of freedom of speech is so repulsive to the ordinary American that I think that Laura Loomer is in the overwhelmingly extreme minority, is in the extreme minority in the United States. I think America is a pleasant land. Americans are wonderful people. And I'm sure I'll be welcomed very warmly when I decide to go, maybe even before the end of next year.
And finally, while we've got you, I just want to get your opinion on sort of the latest news coming from Gaza. So the UN Security Council have today approved Trump's plan for Gaza. What's your response to that?
I think right now there's two loud voices that are shouting in Trump's ear, trying to convince him on the future of Gaza. On the one side, you have the Israelis who are reeling from the way in which Trump imposed a ceasefire that they did not want, and the way that Trump is lending his other ear to the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is telling Trump that he should allow Turkish troops into Gaza. Trump believes that this international stabilizing force, given that Turkey has, in Trump's view at least, been able to keep the peace in Syria, the Israelis are terrified that if Turkish troops are sent into Gaza, it will take the prospect of annexing Gaza off the table. While this doesn't necessarily meet the demands of the Palestinians, I think what is clear is that even if the Palestinians are not having their way, for the first time, neither are the Israelis. And I think that has a lot to do with the transactional nature of Donald Trump. And I think I'll put it, if I had to summarize it, I'd put it in this way. Under Harris or Biden or Obama or Bush or any of these other people who came before, there was a framework that AIPAC imposed that no president found the ability to be able to shake off. Bob Bush in 2008 when he threatened the Israelis. The thing with Donald Trump is he's so unpredictable and so driven by his own desires and poll ratings that even if the Palestinians are unable to ascertain what he's going to do, for the first time, the Zionists don't know what he's going to do either, which is why Netanyahu has gone to Washington 5 times in this particular year. I don't know if this international force will make things better. What I think the optimism is in this latest move is it's clearly something the Israelis do not want. And if that's the case, then clearly they're no longer in control in the way there was before. And that opens opportunities indeed for the Palestinians to advance their cause and perhaps exert some influence over a plan that Trump claims is already done. But in reality, he doesn't really care much about the fine print as long as the media headlines say that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize.